told if I go over time, I'll be edged off. So I'm going to really make sure that I don't do that. Okay. You know, I have a regular talk that I give about my books, but I'm never really talking to writers. So today I had this amazing experience of people came up and asked me the most interesting questions. And because it's a dinner, I'm a dinner speaker and not a seminar speaker, I'm not allowed to answer questions. So I wrote down all of the things that you asked me all day. So I'm going to talk about the things that you asked me. I just wrote question 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. First of all, I ran into someone in the washroom who said their dream would be to write a memoir about everyone they hated in high school. And she said, wouldn't that be fabulous? She said, then when I would go back to my hometown in Saskatoon, and I would go to the bookstore, and everyone would absolutely be thrilled that I was on the bestseller list. She said, that's my total fantasy dream. And she said, and you're so close to doing it, right? So I said, I'm going to tell you tonight at dinner exactly what happened to me when I went back to the bookstore in Niagara Falls, New York, for when I was already on the bestseller list in Canada. As the bookstore owner said, Canada, who lives there? 3 moose and an Eskimo, right? So that's how they felt about being on the bestseller list in Canada. But anyway, when I got there, it was, I don't know if you've ever heard of these stores. They're called Media Play. They're gigantic. I think they only have them in the States. They're these gigantic stores, like bigger than this room, and they have, you know, Game Boys, and they have everything to do with media, and a few books, a few token books, because books, you know, is a form of media. So I went up to the person at the desk, and I said, may I speak to the manager? Of course, he's on lunch. So I'm faced with 2 guys. So I said, hi, I'm Cathy Gildiner. Pregnant pause. They just looked at me, yeah. And I said, I wrote Too Close to the Falls. And they said, oh, yeah. You went over Niagara Falls in a barrel like a long time ago, right? And I said, no, that was actually 1890. And she was in bloomers. No, that wasn't me. He said, no, I'm sure it's you. And I said, I wrote the book, and I know that it wasn't. So they said, oh, okay. So I looked around, and they had no chairs set up for my talk. So I said, is there any way that I could help you set up the chairs? Because I figured people were going to be there in about 10 minutes. And they said, for what? And I said, for the talk that I'm going to be giving about my book and my reading. And they said, well, I don't understand. Like, who would you read to? And then the other guy behind the desk said, are you reading to the blind? I said, no, very often writers will read aloud to people that have read their book. And they looked at each other like I was sort of demented, and it just sort of tripped off the, you know, from a hospital into their store. They looked at me and went, oh, yeah, really? And I said, yeah, you know, I said, let me just tell you something that would make you understand this. If, in fact, you brought Rolling Stones tape or CD, and then the Rolling Stones came to town, even though you've heard them many times, you might actually go to see them. And I said, this is the same thing. People that have read my book actually want to hear me read from it. And they looked at each other and said, cool. Right. That's how I went back to my home. Right. So I just wanted to tell the woman who, you know, that was her dream, that, you know, dreams don't always come true. Okay, now a number of people have come up to me today and said they want to write a memoir, right? And they said some of them don't care if it's published, but they want to write a memoir for their families so that their families will really know what the 1950s, 60s, and 70s were like. And some people say, no, I really want to write a memoir to be published. Like, I totally want it to be published. They said, but here they have one problem. They don't remember anything. Right. And I said, well, that's an ongoing problem. When I was in Banff, actually teaching with Rob Sawyer, we both taught at the Creative Writing School, and I was teaching memoir, and he was doing science fiction. And in my class, everyone came in and sat down, and you know, you're there for 8 hours a day for 3 weeks. So they came and sat down, and I said, we're here to write a memoir. So I said, okay, well, where would you like to begin? They said, well, we don't have any memories. And we thought that was your job. I said, it's my job to come up with your memories? Wow, that's something. But I said, okay, so we'll have to look into finding out what your memories are. We have to find a way of getting those memories out. And I was a psychologist in another lifetime. So I said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go over developmental moments in your life, and each night you're going to write something from that developmental moment. I said, so I made up a number of them, and I actually went through my own book and said, well, maybe this was a developmental moment. Okay, I was specializing in childhood memoirs because this first book was about children. So I said, I want you to write the time that you realized that your family was not the same as other families, right? So people looked at me, and they said, oh, well, my family's very like every other family. And I said, no, that's actually not true. When you think about it, and you're sort of 5 years old, let's look at, like, for example, in Too Close to the Falls. My mother, how many have read Too Close to the Falls? Oh, okay, some, not all. Okay, so, well, I didn't expect all of you, but, right, okay, right, well, okay, in Too Close to the Falls, I'll just have to give you a little background so that you'll know what my developmental moment was. I said, okay, when I was a little kid, I used to jump over fences and climb trees, and I climbed trees so much that the fire department had to take me down, and I did it a number of times. And then my family was the first family in our town to get a television, so I went to the general store and did imitations of Ed Sullivan for money. Right. Which was a really ludicrous thing to do because no one else had a television, so they had no idea who Ed Sullivan really was, right? So anyway, that's what I did, and my mother decided that since I did that for money at the age of 3, I needed medical help. So we went to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician said that what I really needed was to be dewormed. This was in 1952. So when no hyperactive worms emerged, he had another diagnosis. He said he feared this might be the case, that I had a different metronome from other people, and I was busy, bossy, and Irish, and had to work full time. So my mother went home and said, how is she going to work full time? Who's going to hire a 4-year-old? Like, it's sort of, you know, it's not a big market. So my father said, he owned a drugstore in Niagara Falls, and he said, okay, well, I'll have to hire her. And he did. So he told my mother, who was a teacher, she was a math teacher by training, but she only taught for 1 day, because she said she didn't know she'd have to teach children. So I went to work in the store. My father, there was a black delivery car driver named Roy, and Roy was the person who drove the delivery car, and I was the person that read all the names and addresses that were on the prescriptions. So the book is basically about Roy and my life for 10 years together and the adventures that we had in the Niagara frontier. And, you know, when I do give book clubs, people often come up to, or talks, people come up to me and say, you know, I think your mother was, like, she wasn't really on top of things. I mean, letting you drive around the Niagara frontier delivering narcotics. You know, and I say, really, what else makes you self-confident? I mean, when you go to deliver narcotics anywhere, people are happy to see you, right? They are always happy to see you. Like, no one ever says, don't come in, right? Ever.